Name an Elias the Wrench Santos, born and raised in the dense, forgotten alleyways of Bairro de Limoeiro in São Paulo. A master mechanic since his teens, known for his impenetrable focus, his methodical movements, and his absolute reliance on his trade. Elias was a widower, living with his only son, Tiago, an aspiring architecture student who was 19. They lived in a tiny, quiet street in Limoeiro, an island of calm in the chaotic neighborhood, but everything shattered one dawn. Tiago, on his way to an early lecture, was struck down by a stray modified race car being used as a getaway vehicle in a high-speed bank robbery chase. The car, driven by a gang member known only as the Dynamo, was later found abandoned, its driver long gone. Tiago died instantly, his drafting tube and college books scattered across the asphalt. The official report: accidental homicide, collateral damage in a high-profile pursuit. Elias buried his son, sold the boy's car and vanished from the city for nearly 3 years. When he returned, the silent mechanic had become even quieter, his movements sharper, and he always carried a heavy, oil-stained duffel bag. With his return, a name began to circulate, a name whispered only by those who knew how engines worked and how easily they could stop. The Gauge. Before we proceed, drop a comment telling us what city you are tuning in from and the current time. Don't forget to hit the like button. Central Zone, São Paulo, March 2008, Tuesday 06:17 a.m. Elias was returning from a late-night breakdown call, his overalls heavy with grease and a bag of specialized tools on his shoulder. It was a tough job, a humid night, the air thick with exhaust fumes. He was thinking of Tiago, 19, who had called him just before leaving for class. "Pi, I think I figured out the stress load calculations for the new bridge model. Be home for breakfast." "I want to show you." That sentence echoed in his head as he rounded the final turn, but before the corner he saw the flashing lights first, then the wail of a distant ambulance, and the worst sight: a crumpled motorcycle and a crowd gathered around a body, his son's bright yellow backpack visible near the curb. "It's Tiago, my God, it's him," he whispered, his voice failing, as if his throat were filled with grit. His son, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. A high-stakes race between a getaway vehicle and the police. The official version: regrettable accident, the car was speeding. The reality: the driver, the Dynamo, was a known player, and the official forces only cared about the case clearance. The bank got its money back. Elias lost his world. Elias stood there looking at the oil slick mixing with the rain on the pavement and a half-eaten power bar, Tiago's last breakfast, near the drain. He didn't cry then, didn't shout. He just locked up, as if the engine of his soul had seized, leaving him trapped in a recurring nightmare. At the wake, few dared to show their faces. Fear, silence. The police came only to take notes. The neighborhood stayed indoors. One old man, a retired cab driver, leaned in and muttered, "I think it was the Dynamo. I saw him driving that modified coupe like a lunatic down Rua da Consolação." Elias just looked, filing the name away, offering no reply. In the following days, he tried to file reports, talked to detectives, even delivered the security footage from a nearby dry cleaner. The answer was always the same. "The cameras are unfortunately blurry. The case is being processed, Senior Elias. These things happen." These things happen? That's what they said to the father who saw his son's future, an entire bridge of possibilities, crushed on the street. Elias closed up the house, threw out the old non-functional car parts, but sealed Tiago's room. He only went to the garage, sleeping on the cold cement floor. One night he dragged his toolbox out, sat on it, and stared at the dark, closed street for hours. His neighbor saw him and later said, his eyes weren't sad anymore. They were the eyes of a man calculating the exact torque needed to break a life. The reckoning was not coming to him. He was going to it. 3 weeks after the burial, Elias was no longer seen at the local pastelaria, nor at the bus stop for his usual 7 a.m. repair calls. What was seen was a locked garage, a light on in the back room all night, and a man who, when he did leave, avoided eye contact with everyone. At the precinct, the investigation was dead. Elias went one last time, alone, with an envelope of notes, names he'd heard, routes, even the specific engine model of the getaway car. The inspector sighed, flipped through them, and said with a tired blink, "Senior Elias, we can't act on rumors." "But you can act on a dead body, Inspector," Elias replied. Silence. The envelope was shoved into a drawer that was never opened again. Elias left without another word. Outside, he lit a cigarette. He wasn't even a smoker. He knew this would go nowhere. Returning home, he sat on the edge of Tiago's bed, picked up his son's drafting notebook, where one page had a complex load-bearing diagram drawn with a thick mechanical pencil. At the bottom, a note. "Soon, Dad. We'll build this together." Elias put the notebook into the oil-stained duffel bag, locked everything up again, and disappeared for a few weeks. Some said he went to the coast. Others swore he was with relatives in the interior. What nobody knew was that he started showing up in places no one knew him from: specialized metalworking shops, abandoned industrial lots, high-end surplus stores. He bought a new duffel bag, heavy-duty work boots, rubber-palmed gloves, chains, chemical solvents, and a small, hardcover ledger. In this, he began writing differently: maintenance schedules, vehicle IDs, nicknames, addresses. A former apprentice later told the story. He showed up one day, just for his torque wrench. Said he needed it. "Gonna fix something?" I asked. "Just gonna strip a few lives," he said, dry as the day is long. Fear began to circulate in the district. Some said the Dynamo was seen arming a new underground street race circuit. Others said the ringleader. The foreman moles it was operating a chop shop in the port area, but nobody dared to confirm anything. Too much talk shortens your lifespan here. Elias now moved differently: upright posture, precise steps. When he walked past, people looked away as if he'd returned from a war. What they didn't know was that the war was just beginning. Elias's silence wasn't surrender. It was calibration. In the back of his garage, he cleared out a small storage room, formerly used for spare engine blocks. There he put a thin mattress, a shelf with oil cans now filled with water, a tactical flashlight, and a toolbox that held very different instruments: specialized pry bars, razor wire, fine-toothed files, laminated maps of the central zone. On the walls, old photos of his son, and in the black ledger, a grim inventory: the Dynamo, the Foreman. Wire, a lookout on the 23rd of May Avenue, beside the names, routine checkpoints, shift changes. Elias started circulating in the perimeter, dressed in simple work clothes, unshaven, a cap pulled low. To passers-by, he was just another weary mechanic heading to a job, but he wasn't fixing anything. He was observing. One day, he sat for 4 hours at a greasy spoon, ordering only coffee, listening. Another time, he went into a scrapyard and paid a homeless man a small fortune for details about an abandoned warehouse area. These new kids have no respect for the road. The old heads had honor. Now it's just reckless speed and cash. Elias absorbed it all, making silent entries in the ledger. His body changed. He started doing pull-ups on an abandoned I-beam late at night. He ran laps around the nearby industrial park, his face obscured. He trained with a sledgehammer, slamming it into old tires in his backyard. A dull, rhythmic thud, thud, thud. Neighbors thought it was construction. It was just Elias tuning his striking force. One night he took a bus to a remote shooting range, showed a fake ID and paid for 3 hours of practice. He used a borrowed pistol, didn't miss a single shot. "Ever shot before?" the instructor asked. "Only with a rivet gun and a wrench," Elias replied. On his way out, he bought a high-grade utility knife and a coil of steel cable. The clerk tried to make small talk. He just answered, "For cutting gaskets." But it wasn't gaskets he wanted to cut. Time passed, and Elias's face vanished entirely from the normal streets. He now frequented abandoned rail yards, forgotten underpasses, and back alleys that led into the very heart of Limoeiro. One day, a name on his list appeared on the news: Wire, allegedly involved in a high-speed joyriding spree. Elias paused the image, taped a piece of clear plastic over the screen to trace his face, then drew Andraf, X, over the outline. For the first time, a grim satisfaction crossed his face. 3 years is long enough for a lot to change in a neighborhood. Children grow up, shops change hands, the gang leaders rotate. But in that small street in Limoeiro, one thing remained the same: the fear. It was April 2011, when a neighbor recognized the man who walked slowly past the house, with a worn duffel bag on his back, and the same eyes from 3 years ago, but now carrying something more. The weight on his face wasn't just grief, it was mandate. Elias returned as someone who knew every crack in the pavement. His boots made no sound on the asphalt. His steps were deliberate, measured. He sought no conversation, no eye contact. He moved forward, as if every street was just a segment of a circuit. And that same day he climbed onto the roof of an abandoned factory that overlooked the main street, where he'd heard Wire often staked out his targets. He sat there for nearly 2 hours. He didn't even swat a fly. He just watched. He saw who arrived, who left, the dark sedan that stopped every evening, the man who received a package through the window before vanishing into the back alleys. Elias drew the location in his ledger, arrows, timestamps, and a symbol next to Wire's name, a bow, black circle. That night, he slept in a makeshift room in the back of an old friend's garage, a man who owed his father a favor. "I don't want to know what you're doing, Elias. Just no noise. This shop has seen enough breakdowns." Elias didn't answer, just rested his head against the cold cement, dozed for 3 hours in the dark, the knife strapped to his thigh. The next day he went to a hardware store, bought a roll of thick electrical tape, a new pry bar, a pipe wrench, and a compact hydraulic jack. He put everything into a delivery-style backpack. He passed a police checkpoint. No one stopped him. Nobody suspects a mechanic with tools, especially one who doesn't raise his voice, doesn't run, and doesn't look back. It was as if Elias had learned to walk invisible. In the community, the talk was that someone was coming back to collect an old debt. Nobody said the name, but some remembered and whispered, "If it's who I think it is, best not to be out after dark." The first contact was at Zeda Bomba's bar, a small dimly lit dive where the Dynamo, another name on the list, often showed up on Friday nights. Elias walked in, ordered a small beer, and stood at the counter. Dynamo didn't recognize him. He was thinner, harsher, wearing a cap. Elias listened to him talk for over 20 minutes. He was loud, bragging, laughing about the events 3 years ago. "If it was today, I'd run him over again. That kid was nobody's son, didn't even know where the tire marks came from." Elias didn't flinch. He finished his beer, paid in cash, and left. That very night, he drew a map of the bar and the adjacent streets and noted Dynamo, Tues, Thurs, Fry, 8 p.m., leaves on foot, gun on right hip, drunk. For an entire week, Elias studied the first 3 names. It wasn't impulse, it was kinematics. One day, he was nearly stopped by a patrol car. He was on an empty street with his heavy bag, but an old acquaintance, a former assistant who saw him from afar, gave a slight nod and told the officers, "That's St. Elias, a worker, came back to check on his shop." The car drove on. Elias added the assistant's name to his ledger. Beside it, he wrote, "Avoid, knows too much." Then came the night he decided to test the machine he had built for 3 years. It wasn't against the Foreman yet. Elias knew messing with the Foreman was pulling the emergency brake on the whole city. He had to start small, send a message without leaving a fingerprint. The chosen one was Wire, one of the lookouts who, according to the rumors Elias had gathered, had given the wrong location that morning in 2008, mistaking Tiago for a rival messenger. Wire was the most vulnerable. He walked alone, thought he was untouchable, sold stolen phones and ran a small numbers racket. Elias waited for a Wednesday when Wire was leaving a friend's house toward his apartment. The street was dark, no cameras, with a broken street lamp. Elias had rehearsed the route twice, timing every step. At the exact moment he appeared behind him, a dry, precise movement, a heavy oilcloth sack over the head, a knee to the kidney, a quiet fall, all in silence. Tied up with electrical tape, taken to the basement of an abandoned warehouse Elias had prepared days before. Inside, Wire woke up, already bound. The flashlight beam hit his face. Elias didn't say his name, just showed a photograph of Tiago. Then, one of the ruined architectural model. Wire tried to deny it. Not me. I didn't even... But Elias wasn't there to hear excuses. The sound of the pipe wrench echoed through the sealed room like thunder trapped in a metal locker. And when the lights went out, the neighborhood heard nothing, not a single scream, only the silence. The next day, the street corner was empty. A body wasn't found, but the disappearance created a buzz. And that's when one of the younger gang members whispered, "They say the kid's father came back and he's different now." The message was delivered, but it was only the opening sequence. In the block, when a body disappears without sound, without sirens, without a crowd, it has 2 meanings. Either the top command ordered it, or it was someone who knows how to work with precision. And in Wire's case, it wasn't a top-down order. It was the work of a man with oil in his veins and an intact memory. Elias didn't go home that night. He climbed to an abandoned lookout post on a hill overlooking the main street. He sat there, his overalls sweaty, his hands dirty with dust, the ledger open on his lap. Next to Wire's name, he wrote, "Cranked." Next to the Foreman and the Dynamo, the X was still waiting, but the circle around the Foreman's name had thickened. In the following days, Elias moved with increased caution. He changed his route every time, only using the same tools in 2 operations. He learned to disassemble and reassemble his pipe wrench, separating the head from the handle to avoid being caught with it whole. He carried everything wrapped in rags inside a supermarket delivery bag. He looked like a casual worker, and that was his protection. Nobody looks twice at a man carrying groceries, but silence has an expiration date. In the second week after Wire's disappearance, the whispers began. "You heard about Wire, right? They say he messed with the kid's father, but that father doesn't even live here anymore, man." "He does. He came back. He's around, but he's a different kind of animal now." Elias felt the atmosphere change. Some stares lingered half a second too long. A moto taxi refused to take him to a certain point of the hill. An old woman crossed the street when she saw him coming. It was fear, and it was exactly what he wanted. The next piece was Wire's lieutenant, Shank, another name on the list, a heavier figure. Unlike Wire, he had protection, walked with 2 armed guards, wore a radio, and constantly changed addresses. Elias took 3 weeks just to understand his routine. He discovered Shank had a weakness, a new girlfriend who lived in a simple apartment in a distant neighborhood near the highway. Shank went there every Wednesday, between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., alone, always by car, always fast. Elias sketched the plan on a separate sheet of the ledger. He drew the block, marking the light sources, the escape routes, even noting the time the corner convenience store closed. He prepared a bag of dirty laundry to look like a resident. He hid the disassembled pipe wrench inside a discarded water heater on the curb. He waited. Wednesday, 12:02 a.m. Shank's car appeared. Low beams, tinted windows. He parked 3 meters from where Elias was pretending to sleep, huddled between a wall and a tree. Shank got out laughing, talking loudly on the phone. He didn't see the shadow behind him. The blow was dry. The heavy wrench head struck directly at the lower back, a crippling, bone-shattering hit. Shank fell before he could scream. Elias already had the tape in hand, his mouth sealed. He dragged the body to the back of an empty lot. 3 minutes. Quick, without hesitation. And there, just like with Wire, he showed the photo. He didn't say his son's name, didn't explain, just showed the broken diagram. Shank cried, tried to break free, but Elias had already done what he needed to do. The second ixto was drawn in the ledger still that night, on the fire escape of an abandoned building. Limoeiro woke up the next day with 2 rumors. Shank was gone. A note was found near his car. "When the system stalls, the steel will grind." The signature? None. But to those who knew Elias, it said everything. The police radios started crackling with crossed messages. 2 disappearances in less than a month. Victim profile, gang-related. Witnesses? None. A lieutenant even commented in a closed meeting, "Someone is doing what we never had the nerve to do." But the command was clear. Don't stir up trouble where there is no visible blood. So the investigation didn't exist. Meanwhile, Elias moved on. He slept in a different place every week. One day in an old schoolmate's backyard, another in an old construction site where he'd worked years ago. He ate little, only what was necessary. He bathed with a plastic bottle, never turned on a light. He was a ghost with a floating address. And then came the chance for the third name, the Dynamo. The most arrogant, one of the most dangerous. He had clout with the foreman, walked with a gun tucked in his waistband, and spoke loudly in the bars, as if he were untouchable. Elias heard him laughing one night. That father must have killed himself, or is selling spare parts on the street corner. Little did he know the father was listening. The plan was different this time. Elias needed a more direct message. He waited for the Dynamo to leave a barbecue. He was drunk, laughing, singing. He stepped into an alley to urinate. Elias came from behind, cut him off, leaned in, and whispered only this. He was 19 years old. Dynamo turned, his face pale, not comprehending. The last thing he heard was the sound of the pipe wrench, slicing through the air and meeting his temple in a sickening thwack. Elias left the body right there, this time without hiding it. On his chest, he left a photograph of his son's architectural model. The next morning, the community woke up in shock. This time there was blood, this time there was a message, and this time the gang trembled. The foreman ordered security tightened, routes changed, no drinking during shifts. But it was too late. Elias was no longer a father. He was a terminal diagnosis. When the Dynamo's body appeared with Tiago's model photo on his chest, there was no denying it. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't an intergang hit. It was someone with a name, a history, and an uncompromising memory. The block stopped. Not because of the body, they were used to that, but because of the method. No shots fired, no witnesses, no cameras, just the silence punctuated by the dry metallic impact against the concrete. The next day, the police radios were hot. Alert 3. In Limoeiro, 3 key figures down, all linked to that 2008 incident. Probable motive, vengeance. But the problem was different. The gang didn't want an investigation. The foreman didn't want the police on his hill. He ordered a tactical retreat, saying he would deal with it internally. But Elias wasn't internal. He was a man with no boss, no command, no fear of reprisal, and that scared them more than a rifle. He already had the next name on his radar. The cutter, the man responsible for the getaway vehicle's final modifications that night. It was him who, according to old mechanics, gave the order to strip the car to the point of being dangerously unstable. Elias spent 5 days watching. The cutter lived in a 2-story house in the lower part of the neighborhood. He liked to play pool, smoked Marlboros, and wore expensive sneakers. He looked normal but was a viper. He commanded more than he spoke. Elias studied the street, his routines, the neighbor's guard dog. He noticed that every Friday at 10 p.m., the cutter went out to pick up his special dinner. Always alone, always on his custom scooter. That day, Elias was already there, hidden behind a dumpster. When the cutter stopped to pay, Elias came from behind and pressed the utility knife against his side. "Don't scream, cutter." The cutter froze. "Who are you, you psycho?" "Just a father. Who remembers?" He forced him to drive to an abandoned repair shop near the train tracks. Tied him up. Didn't yell, didn't hit, just said, "My son was carrying his life's work. Your modifications didn't discriminate." And the cutter, trembling, said what Elias already knew, that the order wasn't to kill the boy, that nobody knew who was on the street, that it was just to ensure the escape, that it was a mistake. Elias listened, swallowed hard, and then gripped the pipe wrench with both hands. What happened inside? Nobody knew except that the next morning, the cutter's name was crossed off the gang's internal roster. This time Elias left no note, just the muffled sound of the impact. Those who heard, heard. Those who understood fell silent. But the grip of the gang began to weaken. Elias now changed his hiding place every night. His body was at its limit, his eyes hollow, his arm aching, his soul weighing 200 kilo. But he persisted. He wore black clothes, thin rubber gloves, and took deep breaths before every action. He had stopped being just a father. He had become a method. The 5th on the list was Spanner, who at the time was just another minor mechanic, but he was the one who, according to a whisper from an old woman in the park, had given the coordinates for the escape route, sending the car directly onto Tiago's path. Elias didn't confirm. He didn't need to. The pain told him it was true. Spanner was living with his sister in hiding, trying to get out of the life. They said he wanted to move inland. Elias went after him anyway, took the bus, got off in a remote neighborhood, circled the public square until he saw him. He was different. No gold chain, no weapon, no pose. But Elias didn't care about change. If the name was on the list, there was guilt. He followed him to a dirt soccer field, waited for him to enter a makeshift locker room. The light was weak, just a single wire dangling. Spanner bent down to change his shirt. When he looked up, Elias was behind him. Eye to eye. "You know who I am?" Spanner froze. I tried to warn them. I didn't know it was a kid." Elias took a deep breath. His arm trembled. The wrench went up and stopped at its peak. Live with this now. Every single day. Spanner fell to the floor, vomiting, sobbing. Elias turned his back and walked away. It was the only time he spared someone, but he left a note taped to the locker room door. "You survived, but you'll never sleep soundly again." After that, The block went into a state of maximum alert. Nobody walked alone, nobody spoke loudly, and Elias's name became a whisper. They didn't say Elias, they said, "The Gauge," as if saying the name brought bad luck. The wrench now had an owner, and those who heard its sound knew: run or pray. If anyone ever finds that black hardcover ledger with worn corners, they might think it's just another worker's diary. But only those who lived what Elias lived would understand that it was more than paper. It was a verdict. The ledger was bought at a random stationery shop in the suburbs. Elias walked in mute, left in silence. He didn't choose it by the cover or the size. He chose it by the weight. He needed something that could endure. On the first page, he didn't write names. He wrote only this: "If justice fails, I stay calibrated." On the following pages were scribbles, street diagrams, sketches of Limeiro's alleys, escape routes, the habits of each suspect. But what hurt the most was what he wrote at the bottom. Always short phrases, the whispers of a father who couldn't scream, he was going to be an engineer. He needed money for the new drafting software. I promised him a real toolkit. He left early to get a head start. Elias was not an avenger. He was a broken instrument. He slept with the ledger under his pillow, took it to every hiding place. When he went out on a mission, he left it locked inside a metal cabinet. He never wrote out full names, but the codes were clear to him. C1, Turball, corner lookout, spoke loudly, gone. C2, Ovara, shaved head, smirked when he saw the wreckage tape. C3, Shank, thick chain, only going down on a Monday. On one of the oldest pages, he drew his son's face. He wasn't a good artist, but the effort was visible. The delicate mouth, the large eyes, the hair tied back, and below the portrait he wrote, "If the world forgets you, son, I will make them remember." The ledger started small, but soon Elias taped in more pages, newspaper clippings, old photos, even the label from his son's favorite brand of energy drink he found in the garage. It was almost a paper altar, and that's where he returned after every strike, not to celebrate, but to mark, like a man counting a debt paid. Like a man who knows that the pain never leaves, it only changes form. After the cutter and spanner, Elias wrote less. Not because he was giving up, but because the mission was nearing its end. Only one name remained, and it was the heaviest: the foreman. Elias knew going after him was entering a war zone. The foreman had radios, armed men, informants in the police, and lived surrounded by lookouts. Messing with him was inviting death to the dance, but his name had been written from the beginning, in red ink, in capital letters, with 3 circles around it. One night Elias wrote in the ledger as the candle melted beside him, "Foreman walks with 2 guards, changes cars every month, but trusts the courier, the Hills delivery guy, too much. That's my opening." He knew he couldn't attack the throne. He had to attack the legs of the chair, make him lose his footing. He started following the delivery guy, a kid in his early 20s named Leo, who delivered messages, drugs, and money. He was the bridge between the gang and the outside world. Elias never intended to hurt him, but he used him. He made the kid believe he was being followed by a rival faction. He spread rumors, planted false messages. Leo freaked out, asked to leave the hill. The foreman didn't like it, ordered him to stay active. 3 days later, Leo disappeared, and the same day, Elias entered the flow disguised, wearing a delivery uniform, helmet, a box on his back, a fake radio on his belt. He passed the lookouts, past the local bar, went deep into the heart of the hill, and there he saw the man's face, the foreman, sitting, a gold chain, a glass of whiskey in his hand, laughing loudly, bragging, smoking. Elias stopped 20 meters away, pretended to receive a call, turned around and walked out. But before leaving, he looked one last time, memorized the face, the laugh, the location of the gun on his hip, and when he returned to his hiding place, he wrote, "He laughs, the man who has never lost anything. That is about to change." That night, Elias cried for the first time in 3 years. He cried silently on his knees with the ledger open, the wrench beside him, and whispered, "Almost done, son." Elias knew that what was coming was no longer vengeance. It was suicide with purpose. On the other side of the line wasn't just the man who laughed while his son's body cooled on the asphalt. It was the system that protected that kind of man. The foreman wasn't just a dealer, he was a war manager, a judge of death and the owner of the silence. And between Elias and him was a wall called the command. Limoeiro had changed. Now every moto-taxi entrance was checked, any new face on the hill was scrutinized. Lookouts with radios on every corner, makeshift drones high up, kids warning from windows. Elias had to cross all that, and that's when he made the most dangerous decision of his life. Infiltrate as a peripheral worker. He got a fake ID, an old worker's card with a dead man's name, and showed up at a bar where the younger gang members drank. He ordered beer, spoke little, listened a lot. A week later, he was loading boxes at a warehouse linked to the gang. That was it. Starting from the bottom. To them, he was Zay from Maje, a former laborer. Came to try his luck on the hill, quiet, discreet, smoked in secret. Nobody suspected a thing. In 2 weeks, he knew the shift change times, where the heavy weapons were kept, who was the dumbest lookout and who reported directly to the foreman. It was a skinny guy with an office boy face. Rabbit. He carried a cell phone with 3 SIM cards, made deliveries, collected payments, carried the heavy messages. Elias knew that was the weak link. One day, at the end of a shift, Elias offered to take a bag to the corner where Rabbit was. It was just a food delivery, but the simple gesture was noticed. On his return, Rabbit called him aside. "You're quiet, but you work well. Just another guy trying to make it, brother. Foreman likes people who don't ask questions. Keep it up." It was that night that Elias wrote in the ledger, "I'm inside, but the smell here is gunpowder and betrayal." The routine of infiltration was suffocating. He slept in a room with 3 other armed men. He heard conversations about executions, punishment, collection. He closed his eyes and thought of his son, humming off-key in the garage. That was the only thing that kept him whole. The fear of being unmasked was constant. One slip, one wrong phrase, and he'd become a statistic. But Elias had cold blood. He had already died inside the day he buried his son. The rest was just a moving shell. In the 3rd week, the chance came. A Rabbit commented that the foreman was uneasy about someone's presence on the hill. Says there's a guy circling, an old face. Some say it's Tiago's father. Elias froze. Didn't blink. He just answered, "Those rumors turn into smoke quickly." But inside he knew. Time was running out. He needed to act before he was recognized, before someone put the pieces together, before the foreman put a price on the wrong head. In the Saturday pre-dawn, Elias followed Rabbit to the shack where he charged the foreman's cell phone. There he saw the password was punched in with physical button numbers, old but effective. He memorized the sequence, noted it in the ledger. One more piece on the board. The next week, during a makeshift barbecue for the guards, Elias accidentally dropped a bottle. Shards. Blood. He was taken to the Hills Infirmary shack. There he pretended to sleep, while listening to one of the guards' radios transmit. Foreman meeting with managers Monday, 2 a.m. at the rooftop barracks. Elias didn't sleep that night. He stayed with the ledger in his lap, the wrench hidden under the blanket, and wrote, "It's there, or he takes me, or I take him." On the eve, Elias borrowed a guard's radio, saying he was going to test it. He disassembled it, planted a hidden transmitter. On the night of the meeting, he left the radio on in a nearby alley. The entire community listened. They heard the foreman's every word, every joke about the dead, every laugh about the son who fell with a briefcase in his hand. When the foreman said, "Nobody catches the gauge because he's already dead and doesn't know it," Elias was already behind the door. He walked in. The barracks was small, 4 armed men, but he had no plan to leave alive. The wrench cracked on the skull of the first. The second turned and shot, missed. Elias dove, rolled, drove the knife into the knee of the third. Only the foreman remained, falling back, surprised, disbelieving. "It was you this whole time." "No, I am the justice you killed." The sound of the wrench came next. The silence lasted forever. The next day, the hill woke up to an empty barracks. 4 bodies, a radio transmitting, and a note. "My son died without knowing why. Now you know." Elias disappeared that night. Elias didn't take the ledger nor the bag of tools. He took only the wrench wrapped in a black cloth and his son's photograph, worn from being looked at so many times. It was the last name on the list, and he knew either it ended there or it never would. The hill slept with open eyes. After the radio broadcast of the foreman's meeting, the entire command went on high alert. There were rumors of a curfew. Some spoke of retaliation, others of a rival gang trying to invade. But nobody imagined that the man behind it all was still there, meters away, hidden in the cracked concrete of his own war. Elias had already decided. He wouldn't run, nor would he die trying. He would die doing, and if he survived, let hell deal with him later. At 2:43 a.m., he crossed the main alley of Limoeiro, passing behind the industrial park, where the rusty gates rattled in the warm wind. The lights were out. Blame delayed maintenance or an order from above, nobody knew, but for him it was perfect. He entered through the side of the warehouse, climbed the iron staircase, and passed through the makeshift pallet gate. He knew the foreman's barracks was on the top floor. He had studied it 1,000 times in the ledger, drawn, calculated. He even knew how many steps would creak underfoot. His radio was silent, but the hills, that one, was singing. He heard even from a distance the muffled shouts, the movement of armed men, the nervousness spreading like gasoline in the air. The barracks had 3 escape routes. He had blocked 2 with debris the night before. The third would be the last image of the man who destroyed his life. When he entered the building, he took a deep breath. The wrench hung heavy in his hand. Sweat ran down his back, sticking his shirt to his body. And there, at the top of the stairs, he saw the door ajar, a weak light inside, a familiar booming voice, an obnoxious laugh. "He thinks he can come here, the justice-seeking mechanic. Soon we'll make this fool disappear." That was the last sentence the foreman said. Before hearing the first creak of the wood, Elias shoved the door open with his shoulder and stepped in. The room had 3 men, 2 armed. The third seated in a plastic chair. It was him, the owner of the hill, the dirty legend, Tiago's executioner. The first guard didn't even have time to draw his weapon. The wrench came in a swift arc, straight to the shoulder, shattering bones like kindling. The second tried to shoot, but Elias spun, used the falling body as a shield, and advanced, driving the point of the tool into his stomach with all the force in his arm. The foreman tried to stand, his hand trembling, his eyes wide. Elias stopped before him, covered in blood, breathing heavily. "You know who I am?" he asked in a low, firm voice. "You're crazy. You're the father of—" "No, I'm what's left after you erased my life." He didn't scream, didn't thrash. He just accepted it, like a man who knows that one day the bill comes due. The blow was hard-rised at the center of the forehead. One single strike, sufficient. The body fell backward like a sack of cement. Elias stood there watching, then knelt, took his son's photo from his pocket, and placed it on his chest. He took a deep breath, and there, in the room where so many orders for death were given, he spoke only to his son. "It's over, son." He didn't take anything, didn't run. He walked out. On his way out, he turned on the radio he had prepared days before. A loudspeaker hidden in a nearby junction box began to play the recording of the foreman's secret meeting. The entire community heard it. They heard him laughing at the tragedy. They heard him mocking the father. They heard the sound of the truth echoing through the alleys, cutting through the fear. The next morning the gang was silent. Guards weren't talking. Residents weren't opening their windows. The police went up, saw the bodies, and invented the version, internal conflict settling scores. But nobody believed it. Elias disappeared. Some say he fled to a remote farm in the interior. Others swear he's a homeless man, walking around the city center with a lost look. Some say he took his own life days later, but nobody saw it, and those who did aren't talking. The ledger was found months later, hidden in the false bottom of an abandoned water tank. It had torn pages, names crossed out, photos taped in, and a final phrase written in shaky letters. I just wanted him to have made it to his lecture. After that night, nobody ever saw Elias again. Not at the bus stop, not at the repair shops, not on the corners where he used to pass with his son, holding a blueprint tube in one hand and a tool bag in the other. He vanished like a shadow that fulfilled its function and returned to the darkness from which it came. The gang reorganized. Another name took over the hill. The guns didn't stop. The deaths didn't either. But for weeks, the silence was different. It wasn't fear of a bullet. It was respect to auditas guiltion. At the local bar, where the armed men used to laugh loudly, the radio now played softer. On the soccer field, where the runners used to race their bikes, a graffiti appeared. The gauge lives, and so does the bridge. The ledger was anonymously delivered in a brown envelope, left at the gate of a small community newspaper. The editor flipped through it in silence, didn't publish anything. He stored it in a box labeled, "Memories Nobody Wants to Hear." Some say Elias was seen months later in a small town in Paraná. working with metal with his bare hands, alone, talking to no one. Others swear he was marked for death and is still on the run today. But what no one disputes is that 6 key names went down, and none of them by the hand of the law. A retired police chief summed it up over coffee at a downtown diner. That man wasn't a killer, he was a father. The system killed him first. The rest was just a reaction. And whoever passes by the street where it all began sometimes still catches a faint smell of motor oil in the air, or hears very faintly the sound of a mechanical pencil scratching against paper, the same sound the mechanic's son used to make when he designed his impossible bridge. And if your heart tightens at that moment, it's because you, too, have lost something the world pretended not to see. If this story held you until the end, leave a like, share it with those who enjoy true crime stories, and subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. There are still many truths to tell.